They left a gasping infant in my arms and vanished with the cash meant to save his life. 15 years later, I have turned that dying boy into a champion and built an empire on the ashes they left behind. Now that they have returned with empty pockets and fake smiles to claim what is mine, they do not realize I am not opening the door to welcome them home. I am opening the lid to their coffins. My name is Elena. At 39 years old, I stood at the center of my own universe, the owner of the Obsidian Lounge, the most exclusive dining establishment in Chicago. My life was a well-oiled machine of high-end reservations, Michelin stars, and financial statements that were always in the black. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of my 20s, a fortress of stability I had built brick by brick. My greatest achievement, however, was not the crystal chandeliers above me or the imported marble beneath my feet. It was Leo. My son was 15 years old, a miracle of biology and sheer maternal will. The doctors in Switzerland, the ones Rachel had claimed to consult, had said he was a dying infant with a failing heart. They were wrong. Today, Leo was a competitive swimmer with the lung capacity of a pearl diver and a piano prodigy whose fingers moved across the keys like water. He was vibrant, healthy, and entirely mine. The bond we shared was forged in the fire of survival. We were a team of two against the world. The serenity of my Tuesday morning shattered with the arrival of the mail. My assistant placed a heavy, cream-colored envelope on my mahogany desk. "It was sent certified," she said softly. "Do you want me to file it?" I picked it up. The return address was a law firm I did not recognize, but the handwriting on the personal envelope inside stopped my heart. It was a looping, ornate script that I had not seen in 15 years. A cold shiver, sharp and violent, ran down my spine. It was the handwriting of a ghost. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the street, drawn by a terrible intuition. A car had just pulled up to the valet stand. It was a luxury sedan, a model that would have been impressive a decade ago, but now looked tired and rusted around the wheel wells. It was covered in a layer of grime that suggested a cross-country drive. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out. She smoothed down a designer dress that was 2 sizes too small and hopelessly out of season. It was Rachel. She looked older, her face lined with the harsh geometry of bitterness, hidden poorly under layers of heavy foundation. From the driver's side emerged David. My ex-husband looked gaunt, his once charming smile replaced by the nervous twitch of a man who spent too much time looking over his shoulder. He adjusted his tie, his eyes immediately scanning the facade of my building, not with admiration, but with the hungry calculation of a vulture. I went down to the lobby to intercept them. I would not let them tarnish the sanctuary I had built. As soon as the glass doors parted, Rachel saw me, her face contorted into an expression of theatrical relief. "Elena," she cried out, her voice shrill. She rushed toward me, arms wide open, aiming for a tearful reunion hug. I stepped to the side with cold precision. Rachel stumbled forward, her arms embracing nothing but the cool air of the lobby. She caught herself on a velvet armchair, her fake smile faltering for a second before she pinned it back in place. I turned my gaze to David. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the gold leaf detailing on the walls. His eyes were shifting rapidly, assessing the value of everything in the room. "You look well, Elena," David said, his voice raspy. "This place. It is quite something." "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat. Rachel stepped closer, the scent of stale cigarettes and cheap perfume clinging to her expensive coat. She clasped her hands together, feigning a motherly anguish that made my stomach turn. "We have suffered so much, Elena," Rachel said, her voice trembling with a rehearsed sorrow. "We were lost, but now, we are finally back." I stared at her, feeling nothing but a glacial anger. "There is nothing for you here." Rachel straightened her back, dropping the act of the victim for just a moment to reveal the entitlement beneath. She looked me dead in the eye. "We are home," she declared, And we want to see our son. The sight of them standing in my lobby did not just bring back memories. It ripped open a scar I had spent 15 years trying to heal. In an instant, the marble floors of my restaurant vanished, replaced by the faded beige carpet of the apartment I used to visit every day. I was 24 years old then, naive and blindingly trusting. I worshipped my older sister, Rachel, and I adored my husband, David. I believed we were a family unit, bound by love and blood. I was a fool. Back then, Leo was a tiny, fragile thing. He was always pale, his breathing shallow, a heartbreaking bundle of bones and skin. Rachel and David had told me he was born with a rare, degenerative heart condition. They claimed the only hope for his survival was an experimental surgery available exclusively at a private clinic in Zurich. The cost was astronomical. Without a second thought, I had sold my modest studio apartment, liquidated my small retirement fund, and drained every savings account I possessed. I handed them a check for over $200,000, believing I was buying life for my nephew. I remembered that fateful night clearly. Rachel had come to my temporary rental, tears streaming down her face, clutching a plane ticket. "The doctors say we have to go now," she had sobbed, her hands shaking as she held mine. "David and I have to fly out tonight to sign the admission papers, or they won't reserve the operating theater. Can you keep Leo for just one night? We will send for him in the morning with the medical transport." "Of course," I had said, hugging her tight. "Go. Save him." I spent that night holding the baby, rocking him as he wheezed, whispering promises that he would get better. When morning came, no medical transport arrived. I called their phones, straight to voicemail, a sinking feeling, heavy as lead, settled in my stomach. I drove to their luxury apartment, the key they gave me sweating in my palm. The apartment was silent. It was a terrifying, absolute silence. The furniture was there, but the personal touches, the photos, the jewelry boxes, the expensive gadgets were gone. I ran to the nursery. Leo was lying in his crib, wearing a soiled diaper, staring up at the ceiling with dull eyes. He was not crying. He was too weak to cry. Taped to the rail of the crib was a single sheet of paper. I read the note, and the world collapsed around me. "He is not going to make it." The note read in Rachel's handwriting, "We cannot bear to watch him die. It is too much pain for a mother to handle. Do not look for us. We need to heal." I scrambled to the bank, only to find that the Joint Family Trust Fund, which I had foolishly granted David access to for emergency medical expenses, had been drained to zero. They had taken everything, but the true horror came 2 hours later at the emergency room. I stood by the metal railing of the hospital bed as the doctor examined the baby I thought was dying of heart failure. "Ms. Elena," the doctor said, looking at me with grave concern. "Who told you this child has a heart condition?" "My sister. His parents." I stammered. "They said he needs surgery in Switzerland." The doctor shook his head slowly. "This baby has a perfectly healthy heart. He is suffering from severe malnutrition and neglect. He has not been fed properly in months. That is why he is so weak. That is why he is fading." The room spun. They had starved their own son to make him look sick. They had tortured an infant to sell a lie, just to steal my money and run away to a life of luxury. I went to the police, screaming for justice. The detective looked at me with pity but closed the folder on his desk. "They are in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States," he said softly. "Unless they come back voluntarily, there is nothing we can do." I walked out of the station into the cold rain, holding the bundle of blankets tight against my chest. I looked down at Leo, who was finally sleeping peacefully after his first full meal in who knows how long. The grief in my heart calcified into something harder, something colder. "They think you are dead," I whispered to the sleeping boy, my voice trembling with rage. "They think you are trash to be thrown away, but I will make you a king, and when they come back, I will make them wish they had never been born. Please, come into my office where we can talk in private, I said, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. As I walked behind them, I slipped my hand into my pocket and tapped the screen of my phone to ensure it was on silent mode. Once we were inside, I sat behind my desk and casually brushed my fingers against the underside of the mahogany surface, pressing the small button that activated the high-fidelity recording system I had installed years ago for hostile vendor negotiations. Today, it would capture something far more venomous. Rachel collapsed onto the leather sofa, burying her face in a handkerchief that looked suspiciously dry. "Oh, Elena," she wailed, her voice thick with a performance she must have perfected over the last decade. "You have no idea what we have been through. Europe was not a paradise. We were victims. Bad investments. People who promised us the world and took everything. We have been living in exile, crying ourselves to sleep every night thinking about our poor, sick Leo." I watched her with a clinical detachment. It was a lie. Every word was a lie. David paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back in a poor imitation of a concerned father. However, his eyes betrayed him. I saw his gaze linger on the limited edition sculpture on my bookshelf, then drift to the safe in the corner. He was not looking for his son, he was appraising the inventory. "It kills me," David said, turning to me with a furrowed brow. "To think of him suffering all these years. Is he still in the wheelchair? Does he still need the oxygen tank?" The question hung in the air, revealing the depths of their ignorance. They had not bothered to do even a basic internet search. They assumed Leo was exactly as they had left him, a dying burden. They had no idea he was the captain of his swim team. "He requires a lot of care," I said vaguely, leaning back in my chair. "It has been very expensive." "That is exactly why we are here," Rachel said, suddenly dropping the handkerchief. Her eyes sharpened. "Dad passed away last month. Elena, did you know?" I nodded. I knew because I had paid for the funeral they did not attend. "Well," Rachel continued, leaning forward, "he left a significant trust fund for Leo. A fortune, really. But the stipulations are strict. The funds can only be managed by the legal guardians until the child turns 18. Since David and I are his biological parents, we need to take over. We need to do what is right for our boy." So there it was. They were drowning in debt, likely from gambling given David's twitchy demeanor, and they saw Leo not as a son, but as a key to a vault. "But you abandoned him," I said softly, testing the waters. Rachel's face hardened. "We left him in your care because we were broken. And technically, Elena, you never legally adopted him. You have no paperwork. If we wanted to, we could call the police right now and say you kidnapped him. Imagine the scandal for your lovely restaurant. It was a threat, clumsy and desperate. They were trying to gaslight me, to twist their desertion into my crime." I let my shoulders slump. I widened my eyes, injecting a tremor of fear into my voice. "Please, I do not want any trouble," I stammered, looking down at my hands. "I cannot go to jail. I have worked so hard for this place." David smirked. He exchanged a glance with Rachel, a look of pure triumph. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the same pushover sister who gave them her life savings 15 years ago. "We do not want to ruin you, Elena," David said, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. "We just want our son back, and the control of his assets. Of course. It is for his own good." "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, you win. But give me a few days to prepare him. He is very fragile. Make it fast," Rachel snapped. "This Saturday, I proposed. We are hosting a large charity gala here at the restaurant. It will be crowded, which might make Leo feel safer meeting you. I will have my lawyer draft the transfer of guardianship papers. You can sign them after the party." Rachel stood up, smoothing her dress. "Saturday, then. And Elena, do not try anything stupid. We are his parents. The law is on our side. I understand." I said. They walked out of my office with their heads held high, strutting like conquerors. I watched the door close, the silence rushing back into the room. I reached under the desk and stopped the recording. They thought they had bullied me into submission. They thought they were walking away with a winning lottery ticket. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own execution. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, sealing my office from their toxic presence, I picked up my phone. My hands were not shaking. I dialed the number of Mr. Vance, the private investigator I had kept on a retainer for the last 10 years. He answered on the second ring. "I know you are calling." "Elena," Vance said, his voice gravelly. "I got the alert that they crossed state lines yesterday. I just emailed you the full dossier on their European vacation." I opened my laptop. The screen filled with images that made my blood boil. There were no photos of grieving parents mourning a dying child. Instead, there were high-definition shots of Rachel and David sunbathing on yachts in the Mediterranean, throwing chips onto roulette tables in Monaco, and drinking vintage wine in Paris. They looked euphoric. They had spent 15 years living like royalty on the money meant to save a baby's life. "They look happy," I said, my voice dripping with acid. "They were," Vance replied. "Until the money ran out 6 months ago, David has racked up gambling debts in 3 different countries. They are desperate. Elena, and desperate people make mistakes." I hung up and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Chicago skyline. I spun the dial and pulled out a dusty, yellowing file folder. Inside were the original forged medical records Rachel had used to solicit donations from local charities before she fled. I ran my fingers over the fake doctor's signature. This was the first nail in their coffin. Next, I called my personal attorney. "I need you to draft a transfer of guardianship agreement," I told him. "Make it look standard, official, and ironclad. But leave the signature line for the judge blank. It needs to be a prop. Nothing more." The front door of the apartment above the restaurant slammed open. Leo was home from school. He walked into the office, tossing his swim bag onto the sofa. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the kind of vitality that comes from endless hours in the pool. "Mom, you should have seen me today," Leo said, grinning. I shaved 3 seconds off my freestyle. I looked at him, my heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "Leo, sit down. We need to talk." I told him everything. I did not sugarcoat the abandonment, the theft, or the lie about his heart condition. I told him they were downstairs just an hour ago, demanding to take him back because they saw him as a paycheck. I expected tears. I expected confusion. Instead, Leo's expression darkened. His jaw tightened, and his eyes, usually so warm, turned into shards of ice. "They are not my parents," Leo said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are my mother. They left me to die in a crib so they could go on a holiday, and now they think they can just walk back in. They want the inheritance from your grandfather," I explained. "They need to prove they are caring parents to get it." Leo stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Do you want me to kick them out? I can handle it." "No," I said, standing beside him. "I want to destroy them, but I need your help. They think you are a sick, invalid boy. Can you play the part? One last time?" Leo looked at me, and a slow, sharp smile spread across his face. It was not a nice smile. "I can be whatever you need me to be. I will be so pathetic they will drool over the money." With Leo on board, the stage was set. Over the next 48 hours, I transformed the main stage of the Obsidian Lounge. I had my tech team install microscopic cameras and high-sensitivity microphones in the floral arrangements and the centerpieces. Nothing would be missed. I sent out special, discreet invitations. I invited the old pediatrician whose name they had forged. I invited a representative from the Gambling Commission. I tracked down a loan shark's enforcer who had been looking for David and sent him a VIP pass. Finally, I contacted a friend in the Financial Crimes Division of the police force. Just as I was finalizing the guest list, my phone buzzed. It was Vance again. "Elena, I found something else in their trash from the hotel, Vance said. Receipts for prenatal vitamins, and an appointment confirmation for an obstetrics clinic. I froze. She is pregnant, I asked. Disgusted. 4 months, Vance confirmed. It looks like they realized Leo turns 18 in 3 years, and they need a new sympathy prop to keep the scams going after he ages out. The phone almost cracked in my grip. They were not just here to exploit Leo, they were planning to do it all over again to another innocent child. Thank you, Vance, I said, my voice trembling with a deadly calm. That was the last piece of ammunition I needed. I had given them a platinum credit card for necessities, a digital leash that allowed me to track their every movement. I sat in my office, watching the transaction alerts scroll across my computer screen like a ticker tape of their moral bankruptcy. They were staying at the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton. Within 3 hours, they had spent $12,000. They were not buying medical equipment for the sick child they claimed to miss so dearly. They were at the most expensive boutiques on the Magnificent Mile. The notifications pinged one after another: Gucci, Prada, a jeweler known for custom diamond watches. They were dressing themselves up like royalty for the slaughter. I could imagine them in the dressing rooms, squeezing their soft, lazy bodies into sequined gowns and velvet tuxedos, preening in the mirror, convinced they had fooled the naive little sister once again. While they shopped, I finalized the menu for the gala with my head chef. It was a private joke, a culinary middle finger that only I would understand until the trap sprung. For the appetizer, I said, pointing to the draft menu, we will serve the Zurich Illusion. It should be a hollow puff pastry, beautiful on the outside, completely empty on the inside. And the main course the chef asked, pen hovering, heart of stone. I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Make it rare. Bloody. My phone rang. It was Rachel. Elena. She barked, her voice echoing as if she were in a large, tiled bathroom. About the money. David and I have found a specialist in Boston who can see Leo, but we need to fly him out immediately after the party. I need you to have a cashier's check ready for $50,000. We cannot wait for bank transfers. $50,000, I asked, injecting a tremor of hesitation into my voice. That is a lot of money to pull together by Saturday. Do you want him to die? Rachel snapped, the venom instant and practiced. God, Elena. You are so selfish. You always have been. Just have the check ready. I am sorry. I whimpered into the receiver. I will do it. Please do not be mad. I just want Leo to get better. Good, she said, and the line went dead. I placed the phone down. The check would be ready, but it would not be made out to her. Downstairs. The restaurant was closed for rehearsal. Leo sat at the grand Steinway piano in the center of the room. He was not playing a soft, welcoming melody. He was practicing Suggestion Diabolique by Prokofiev. It was a piece of music that sounded like a storm, like a judgment, full of dissonant chords and aggressive energy, harder on the bass notes. I called out from the shadows, I want them to feel it in their chests. Leo nodded, his fingers crashing down on the keys with a power that shook the floorboards. He was ready. As the invitations arrived in mailboxes across Chicago, the guest list grew to include the city's most predatory journalists and news anchors. I wanted the cameras rolling. I wanted their downfall to be broadcast in high definition. Thursday afternoon, my security team intercepted a disturbance at Leo's private school. David had tried to pick Leo up early, claiming a family emergency. He was very insistent. The head of security told me over the phone. He grabbed the boy's arm. Leo played it perfectly, though. He acted terrified and started coughing like he couldn't breathe. We had to physically remove the father from the grounds. Did he say anything I asked? He screamed that he owned the boy. The guard replied. He said his son was a gold mine. I thanked him and hung up. The air in the city felt heavy, charged with the static electricity of an approaching thunderstorm. Every hour that ticked by was a step closer to the end. I felt a cold, vibrating excitement in my veins, a high that no drug could replicate. On the night before the party, I stood alone in my dressing room. The house was silent. I looked at my reflection in the tall, gilded mirror. For 15 years, I had worn the mask of the grieving aunt, the hard-working survivor, the polite businesswoman. I reached up and touched the glass. "You are done," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. My eyes, usually warm and inviting for my customers, were hard as diamonds. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. There was only the clean, white-hot heat of hatred. Rachel and David were sleeping in silk sheets tonight, dreaming of millions. They did not know that tomorrow. I would not just strip them of their dignity, I would flay them alive in front of the whole world. The Obsidian Lounge was a kaleidoscope of diamonds, silk, and hypocrisy. I had spared no expense for the evening. Towering arrangements of white lilies, the flower of funerals and innocence, loomed over the tables, their scent heavy and cloying in the warm air. The room was packed with the elite of Chicago politicians, tech moguls, and the vultures of the press, all sipping vintage champagne and waiting for a show. Rachel and David made their entrance like conquering heroes returning from a war they never fought. Rachel wore a blood-red gown that clung to her figure, bought yesterday with my credit card for $6,000. David was in a bespoke tuxedo, adjusting his cuffs with the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him a living. They did not look like parents who had abandoned a dying child. They looked like royalty who had been temporarily inconvenienced. They worked the room with the precision of seasoned con artists. I watched from the shadows of the bar as Rachel grabbed the hands of a prominent city councilwoman, her eyes glistening with summoned tears. "It has been 15 years of hell," Rachel sobbed, her voice perfectly pitched to carry over the ambient jazz. "We wanted to come back. We really did. But Elena, she cut us off. She told us Leo was too sick to be moved, that we would only make it worse. She kept our baby from us." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Heads turned in my direction. I felt the weight of their judgment, the sharp, stinging glances of people who were suddenly rewriting their opinion of me. To them, I was no longer the successful entrepreneur. I was the jealous sister who had stolen a child. I played my part. I lowered my head, keeping my eyes fixed on the tray of hors d'oeuvres I was holding. I moved through the crowd, offering drinks with a trembling hand, looking every bit the guilty, submissive sibling. "I am so sorry," I whispered to a guest who glared at me. I wanted what was best for him." I approached the VIP table near the stage where Rachel and David had set up court. They were drinking expensive scotch, their faces flushed with the intoxication of attention and impending wealth. Rachel saw me and her expression hardened instantly. She slid a thick manila envelope across the white tablecloth. "Sit down, Elena," she hissed, her voice low so the nearby guests could not hear, "and sign the papers. Now. We are not waiting until the end of the night." "But Leo is not even out here yet," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't you want to see him first? We know what he looks like." David sneered, taking a large gulp of his drink. "He is a cripple in a chair. Just sign the damn transfer of guardianship so we can take him and get out of here. This party is exhausting. Please," I begged, clutching my hands together. "He has been so excited to meet you. He prepared a welcome gift, a song. He wants to play the piano for you." David laughed, a short, cruel sound that was swallowed by the noise of the room. He leaned in close to Rachel, whispering loud enough for me to hear. "A song. Seriously. The kid can barely breathe, and she thinks he can play. It is going to be pathetic, just wheezing and banging on keys. God, this is going to be embarrassing." Rachel rolled her eyes but leaned back, crossing her arms. "Fine. Let the cripple play his little song. But the second he stops, you sign. Do you understand me, Elena? Or I swear to God, I will scream kidnapping so loud the police will be here in 2 minutes." "I understand," I said softly. I stood up and signaled to the lighting booth. In a heartbeat, the chandeliers dimmed, the chatter in the room died down, replaced by a confused silence. The ambient jazz cut off abruptly. The room was plunged into total darkness, heavy and suffocating. Then, a single, brilliant beam of white light cut through the blackness. It struck the center of the stage, illuminating the magnificent grand piano standing there like a black beast waiting to wake up. From the wings of the stage, a figure emerged into the harsh white spotlight. It was not a nurse pushing a wheelchair. It was not a pale skeleton of a boy gasping for air from an oxygen tank. It was Leo. He stood 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad and powerful under a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. He walked to the center of the stage with the confident, athletic stride of a champion swimmer. His hair was thick and dark, his skin glowing with health, and his eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd until they locked onto the VIP table. The sound of shattering glass sliced through the silence. I watched with deep satisfaction as the crystal flute of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon slipped from Rachel's slack fingers. It hit the floor, exploding into shards and splashing a dark, blood-red stain across the pristine white carpet and the hem of her gown. David was frozen, his mouth hanging open in a grotesque display of shock. He looked as if he were seeing a ghost, or perhaps a monster he had created. Leo did not acknowledge them. He sat at the piano bench, adjusted his cuffs, and let his hands hover over the keys for a fraction of a second. Then, he struck. The first chord was not a melody, it was a declaration of war. It thundered through the sound system, vibrating in the chests of every guest in the room. Leo played with a ferocity that was almost frightening. His fingers flew across the ivory keys, channeling 15 years of abandonment and anger into a symphony of judgment. It was flawless, powerful, and utterly commanding. There was no trace of the dying infant they had sold for a vacation. There was only a prodigy. When the final dissonant note rang out, Leo stood up. He did not bow. He walked to the microphone stand and pulled it off the clip. His voice, deep and steady, echoed through the stunned banquet hall. "This piece is dedicated to the only mother I have," Leo said, his voice booming as he pointed a steady finger directly at me. Standing in the shadows, the woman who saved me from the grave and gave me a life. The silence that followed was absolute, until Rachel scrambled out of her chair, knocking it over with a loud crash. "Leo," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Leo, baby. It is me. It is Mommy, your real mother. She has brainwashed you." She stumbled toward the stage, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face that looked terrified rather than touched. Leo looked down at her. He did not flinch. He did not step back. He looked at her with the cold curiosity of a scientist examining a bug. "I do not have a real mother who leaves her son to die in a crib so she can go to Europe," Leo said into the microphone. His tone was not angry. It was icy, devoid of any warmth. "I do not have a father who steals the money meant for my heart surgery to play roulette." David snapped out of his trance. His face turned a violent shade of purple. He lunged toward the stage, his fists clenched. "You ungrateful brat," David roared, spit flying from his lips. "I am your father. I have rights. You belong to me." He made it 2 steps before my head of security. A man the size of a mountain stepped out from behind a pillar. He grabbed David by the shoulder and pinned his arm behind his back with effortless ease. David howled in pain, thrashing against the restraint. "Let go of me," David shouted, looking around at the crowd for support. "This is kidnapping. That woman stole my son. I have rights." I stepped out of the shadows then. I walked up the stairs to the stage, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically against the wood. I stood next to Leo, placing a hand on his shoulder. We stood as a united front, looking down at the 2 people who had tried to destroy us. I took the microphone from Leo. "You want rights?" I asked, my voice calm. amplified to fill every corner of the room. You want the world to know you are his parents. Fine. You want the world to know you are his parents. Fine. Let us show them exactly what you did with those rights 15 years ago. I raised a remote control and pressed the button. Behind us, the massive projection screen that spanned the entire back wall of the stage flickered to life. The room went dark again, save for the glow of the screen, which became a window into a nightmare. The first image was grainy, taken with a disposable camera 15 years ago, but the horror was high definition. It showed Leo in his crib, a tiny, skeletal figure with ribs pressing against translucent skin, alone in an empty apartment. Next to his head lay the handwritten note Rachel had left behind. The handwriting was magnified to 10 feet tall so every guest could read the cruel, looping script, "He will not make it. Do not find us." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a physical blow. The screen shifted. Now it displayed a series of bank statements. A red laser pointer, which I controlled from the podium, traced the flow of money. "Here is the withdrawal of $200,000 from the Family Emergency Fund." I narrated, my voice cold and clinical. It was labeled "Emergency Surgery, Zurich." And here, 3 days later, is where that money actually went. The screen flashed logos of the Casino de Monte Carlo and luxury hotels in Monaco. The dates matched perfectly. The amounts were staggering. $10,000 for a suite. $5,000 for a single dinner. They did not buy a pacemaker, I said, looking down at Rachel, who was shaking her head violently. They bought champagne. Then came the audio. I pressed a button, and Rachel's voice, recorded just 2 days ago in my office, boomed through the speakers. It was crisp and clear. "He is a cripple, a burden. We just need the guardianship to access Dad's trust fund. Once we have the money, we can put him in a home or something." The reaction in the room was visceral. The guests, who moments ago were drinking wine and chatting, recoiled. Women covered their mouths. Men glared at the couple with undisguised disgust. The facade of the grieving parents had not just cracked, it had been pulverized. I clicked the remote again. Documents appeared showing forged medical records. "This is the heart condition diagnosis," I explained, "signed by a Dr. Roberts. But as you can see from the database of the medical board, no such doctor exists. Rachel created him on a laptop to defraud 3 different children's charities of $50,000. David, realizing the ship was sinking and he was chained to the anchor, turned on his wife. He grabbed Rachel's arm, his eyes wide with panic. It was her. David screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Rachel. I told her we should go back. "She forced me," she said. "She said the baby was already dead. I am a victim here." Rachel shrieked and clawed at his face. "You liar. You gambled it all away. You begged me to forge those papers. It was a pathetic, grotesque display of rats eating each other." My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, stepped out from the side of the stage. He held a leather portfolio. He adjusted his glasses and spoke into the microphone Leo held out for him. "Actually, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dry and authoritative, "the will of Mr. Sterling was updated 2 weeks before his death. He was fully aware of your abandonment. Elena is the sole guardian. Furthermore, there is a specific clause if either Rachel or David attempts to contact the child. The entire estate is frozen and donated to the state." Rachel froze. Her face went slack. She looked around the room, realizing she had not just lost the money. She had lost her reputation, her freedom, and her last escape route. "And one last thing," I said, stepping forward. We ran a background check on David. The screen changed one final time. It showed a mugshot of David from a different state, looking younger but equally smarmy. "This is Robert Miller," I announced, "wanted in Nevada for a Ponzi scheme involving senior citizens' pensions. He has been hiding under the name David for 20 years. The heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open. 2 police officers marched in, their hands resting on their belts. The sound of their heavy boots on the floor was the only sound in the room. Rachel looked at me, and for the first time, I saw true terror in her eyes. "Elena," she whimpered, "please." I just smiled. It was the same smile I used when I closed a business deal. "Goodbye, sister," I said. Rachel realized there was nowhere left to run. The heavy double doors were blocked by the officers, and the evidence of her crimes was glowing 50 feet high behind her. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, she threw herself onto the floor at Leo's feet. She grabbed the hem of his trousers, her knuckles white, her face a mask of ruined mascara and terror. "Leo, please," Rachel shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am your mother. You cannot let them take me. I did it for us. I made a mistake, but I love you. Look at me. Baby, please look at me." The room held its breath. For a second, the image was almost biblical, the weeping mother and the judging son. But Leo did not look down with pity. He looked down with revulsion. He took a deliberate step back, pulling his leg away from her grasping hands as if she were something contagious. "You killed your son 15 years ago," Leo said, his voice flat and final. "You left him to die in a dirty crib. I am not him. I am Elena's son." Across the room, David saw his wife collapse and realized the walls were closing in. He did not rush to help her. Instead, he bolted. He shoved a waiter aside, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor, and sprinted toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. He did not make it far. My head chef, a man who had once played linebacker for a semi-professional football team, stepped into the doorway. He crossed his massive arms over his chest. David skidded to a halt, looking frantically between the chef and the approaching police officers. "Going somewhere?" the chef asked. The officers caught him by the elbows, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and satisfying. "Robert Miller, also known as David Vance," the senior officer announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Rachel Sterling, you are under arrest for child abandonment, insurance fraud, and violation of your previous probation." Rachel was hauled to her feet by the second officer. The realization that her life was over snapped the last thread of her sanity. She stopped crying and started screaming. She twisted her body, lunging toward me with a face contorted by pure animalistic hate. "You bitch," Rachel screamed, spitting on the floor. "You planned this, you jealous, barren witch. You stole my husband. You stole my son because you could never have one of your own. You thief, you stole my life." The guests gasped, recoiling from the sheer ugliness of her words. I stood perfectly still on the stage, looking down at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had the microphone, and I had the truth. I was not robbed. "Rachel," I said, my voice calm, echoing through the hall. "You did not lose anything. You threw your husband and your child into the garbage so you could chase a fantasy. I just happened to be the one who picked them out of the trash and polished them until they shined." David, pinned against the wall, stopped struggling. He turned his head to look at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrifying realization of what he had thrown away. He looked at the luxury around him, at the handsome, talented son he had abandoned, and then at me. His eyes were filled with hate, yes, but also a profound, trembling fear. He knew he was going to die in a cage. From the back of the room, a single person started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire banquet hall erupted into applause. It was a surreal, thunderous sound. They were not applauding the party or the music. They were applauding the savage, poetic justice they had just witnessed. "Get them out of here," the officer commanded. Rachel continued to scream obscenities as she was dragged backward toward the exit. Her heels dragged across the carpet, leaving 2 long lines in the plush fabric. "It is not fair. It is my money. He is my son." Her voice faded as the heavy doors swung shut behind them, cutting off her wails. The sudden silence that followed was heavy, ringing in my ears. The tension drained out of the room, leaving behind a clean, empty space. I turned to Leo. He was standing tall, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes bright. He looked at me and nodded. We were the only 2 left standing on the stage, bathed in the white spotlight, surrounded by the ruins of the people who had tried to break us. We had won. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing the toxicity of my past outside the walls of the obsidian lounge. The silence that followed was thick, the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. I lifted the microphone to my lips one last time, my hand steady, my pulse finally slowing to a comfortable rhythm. "Please," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face for the first time that evening. "Do not let the trash taking itself out ruin the champagne. Tonight, we are not just celebrating a charity gala. We are celebrating freedom." I looked out at the sea of stunned faces and raised my glass. And regarding the inheritance my sister was so desperate to steal, I continued, my voice ringing with authority. "I am pleased to announce the immediate formation of the Leo Foundation. Every single penny of the trust fund will be used to provide legal and medical aid to children who have been abandoned or exploited by their guardians. The money they wanted for their gambling debts will now save lives." The applause that followed was not polite, it was raucous. The party continued into the early hours of the morning, but the air felt lighter, cleaner, as if a storm had finally broken. 3 weeks later, the trial of Rachel Sterling and Robert Miller dominated every newspaper in Chicago. It was a circus, and I sat in the front row for every single session. The prosecution was ruthless, but the final nail in their coffin came from their own incompetence. During the search of their hotel room, police had seized a battered vintage suitcase David had dragged across Europe. Hidden in the lining was a handwritten letter from David to a criminal associate, dated 2 years prior. In the letter, David had outlined a plan B if they ever managed to get custody of Leo. If the kid becomes too much of a burden or the medical bills get too high. The letter read, "We can always stage a swimming accident. He has a history of heart trouble. No one would question it if he drowned. Then the insurance payout would be 100% ours." The audible gasp in the courtroom when the prosecutor read those words was the sound of their lives ending. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. Because of the premeditated nature of the conspiracy and the sheer cruelty of their crimes, the judge showed no mercy. They were both sentenced to 50 years in a maximum security federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 30 years. They would die in cages, just as they had left Leo to die in a crib. With the chapter of my past finally closed, I decided to scrub the last remnants of them from my life. I sold the old apartment, the place where I had spent so many nights crying over unpaid bills and a sick baby. I bought a sprawling modern villa on the shores of Lake Michigan. It was a house filled with light, open spaces, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Leo thrived in the freedom. He graduated as the valedictorian of his high school class and was accepted into the most prestigious music conservatory in the country on a full scholarship. On his 18th birthday, we stood in a courtroom one last time, not for a trial, but for an adoption hearing. He officially changed his last name to mine. He was no longer a Sterling. He was my son, in name and in blood of the heart. On a crisp autumn evening, I sat on the balcony of my restaurant, looking out over the glittering skyline of Chicago. I held a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in my hand, the same wine I had been too poor to afford 15 years ago. The city below moved with a frantic energy, but up here, everything was peaceful. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from the inmate communication system. Incoming video call request from prisoner 8940, Rachel Sterling. Reason requesting final visitation. I stared at the screen. I could imagine her in her gray jumpsuit, stripped of her fake diamonds and her delusions, sitting in a cold booth, desperate for one last chance to manipulate me, to beg, to blame. I took a sip of my wine, the rich, dark flavor coating my tongue. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I felt absolutely nothing. With a calm, deliberate motion, I pressed the red block button. I turned my chair around to face the open doors of the balcony. Inside, Leo was playing the piano for the dinner guests. The melody was light, joyful, and full of life. I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not seeing them in handcuffs, though that was satisfying. The true revenge was sitting here, drinking this wine, listening to my brilliant son play, and living a life so magnificent, so full of love and success, that they could never, ever touch it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and share our experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.